During a visit to the palace, Camilla's son's trunk was opened, and what happened next stunned everyone in the palace.
Royal duties often unfold with precision and discipline, but sometimes a single unexpected moment can send shockwaves through the palace. When a royal guard reportedly opened the trunk of Queen Camilla's car, what was revealed inside sparked immediate tension. The discovery left witnesses stunned, but it was Prince William's reaction that truly shook those present. His next move wasn't just surprising. It raised serious questions about loyalty, secrecy, and hidden truths within the monarchy. So, what exactly did William do after that shocking discovery was made? Let's reveal the details. Camilla's private world meets palace protocol. Camilla rose before dawn, savoring the hush that fell over the palace in those early hours. She liked the small drawing room where sunlight arrived slowly, and papers waited like quiet companions. Even after years inside the royal fold, she still kept the private corners of her life close. Memories, calls to family, and the small routines that made her feel whole. Those habits steadied her through public duties and long formal days. On that morning, she read notes about upcoming events and let her mind drift to familiar comforts. A car pulled up near the private entrance, and Sergeant Whitmore, a guard with years of service, noticed something off. The plate carried no clear clearance in the system, and the trunk sat lower than it should, giving the lid an odd, weighted look. Whitmore had a habit of spotting small mismatches, a plate that did not fit, a scuff out of place, and he took those signs seriously. He called a fellow guard over, and together they moved around the vehicle with the slow, careful steps of people who hoped nothing would go wrong. In the courtyard, a hush followed their movement. Staff slowed their tasks and peered from behind doors, curiosity mingling with the quiet fear that a routine morning might tilt into something stranger. Inside, Camilla continued with her papers until someone knocked and asked if she could step outside. She rose and moved through familiar halls, thinking little of it at first, assuming it was a matter that would be handled without fuss. When she reached the courtyard, she saw the car and the guards and felt a flicker of tension. Palace life taught her to accept scrutiny, yet seeing officers attend to her vehicle felt like an intrusion she never welcomed. Whitmore explained calmly about the unregistered plate and the unusually heavy trunk. Camilla listened with the composed patience she had learned over years of public life. Her expression stayed steady, but inside, a prickle of worry rose. She had worked hard to keep private parts of her life separate from the glare that came with royal status. The thought that something personal might be exposed in the open courtyard tightened her chest. As they spoke, another car arrived. Prince William stepped down and took in the scene with the quick assessment of someone used to deciding under pressure. He had planned only to speak with Camilla about an event, but the cluster of guards and the guarded trunk made him stop. William listened to Whitmore, studied the plate numbers and the weight in the lid, then moved with quiet, certain steps. Authority seemed to come as naturally as breath. For the guards, his presence settled the chaos into procedure. Camilla bristled. She did not like others taking charge where she felt her private life could be touched. But she also knew the careful rules inside these walls. The exchange that followed was measured and tense. Camilla asked for privacy, for respect for what belonged to her and to her home. William, the inevitable keeper of protocol on palace grounds, spoke for safety and procedure. The guards remained polite but firm, their training leaving no room for exceptions when a locked object might hide a risk. Staff watched with a held breath, aware that every small move could become a larger story. A low radio crackled, shoes scuffed quietly. Even the birds outside seemed to hush. There was a sense that something private was about to be opened for public inspection. When the trunk lid was eased a few inches, a metal case peeked out. Old, dented, sealed with a small combination lock. It looked like an object that had traveled, carrying private papers or cherished things, the sort of box people lock when they want to keep certain memories away from prying hands. Camilla's jaw tightened at the sight. She had spent years defending boundaries, balancing what must be shared for the public good and what should remain hers alone. William's face showed his duty, a focus on safety that left little room for personal pleas. The guards reminded him of the rule: locked containers on royal property must be checked. The moment hung between the need for security and the right to privacy, and everyone waited to see which would come first and what would follow. The trunk was forced open. What lay inside would change everything. Will you stay glued to your screen and find out? The secrets found in Camilla's trunk. The atmosphere in the courtyard had shifted. What began as a routine inspection now carried the weight of something deeper, something no one present could have predicted. Guards stiffened in silence, their eyes flicking from one another as William took the key from Sergeant Whitmore's steady hand. The trunk's lock gave way with a reluctant creak, and when the lid lifted, even the most seasoned staff froze. Inside was not the expected clutter of travel bags or ordinary belongings. Instead, carefully stacked in tissue and bound with faded elastic, lay bundles of handwritten pages. The inked lines flowed across aged paper in a style instantly recognizable. The bold, sweeping curves and slanted letters carried a voice long absent, yet never forgotten. These were not mere notes. They were diaries, leather-bound and worn from use, their edges softened by time, their covers creased from being opened again and again. At the bottom, sealed envelopes waited, each bearing the unmistakable script of Diana. Her handwriting, sharp yet elegant, was like a voice returning from the past, and the sight of it silenced everyone. Camilla stood still, her face unreadable, her body composed as if nothing about the discovery caught her off guard. Yet that very calmness unsettled those around her. The guards shifted uneasily. Whitmore glanced at William, waiting for direction. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Why were such personal relics believed to be locked away in the most secure archives, here in plain sight inside Camilla's trunk? How had they left the guarded vaults of the royal collection, and who had placed them in her possession? William's expression gave nothing away, but his eyes remained fixed on the diaries. He stepped closer, lifting one carefully as though it might crumble under his touch. The leather was cool and worn smooth from hands that once turned its pages. For William, the object carried more than words. It carried memory, loss, and the echo of his mother's voice. What lay inside those books was not state documents or official records. They were fragments of Diana's life, thoughts she never meant for the world to see, moments she had kept only for herself. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. This was no longer about enforcing palace protocol. This was about the sudden resurfacing of secrets long thought buried. Some staff stepped back, as though the weight of history was too heavy to stand so near. William lowered the diary with deliberate care, his hand pressing the lid of the trunk down slowly. The silence stretched across the courtyard, punctuated only by the muffled sounds of distant palace life continuing as though nothing had changed. But for those present, everything had shifted. Camilla's stillness spoke volumes. She offered no protest, no denial, not even a word of explanation. That lack of reaction unsettled William more than any argument could have. Why wasn't she surprised? Why wasn't she shocked at the sudden reappearance of items that had once belonged solely to Diana? The absence of emotion, the controlled mask, suggested knowledge, or at least familiarity, with what was now uncovered. And if she had known, what did that mean about her role in how these diaries ended up here? The gravity of the find could not be overstated. These were not keepsakes forgotten in a drawer. They had been stored under lock and key, removed from public reach to protect Diana's memory and the privacy of her thoughts. For them to appear here meant someone with access, someone inside, had taken them. That act was not just theft, it was a betrayal. The kind of betrayal that could fracture trust within the walls of the monarchy itself. The guards awaited orders, their radios crackling faintly as though to remind everyone of the protocol that demanded a swift response. William, steady and resolute, gave a simple command. The trunk and its contents were to be taken away immediately, secured without interference, and locked in his own keeping. The guards moved swiftly, summoning reinforcements. Heavy boots echoed across the stone as the trunk was lifted, its weight more symbolic than physical. The slam of the car door reverberated like a gavel striking judgment. Yet even as the object was carried off, no one present felt a sense of closure. The silence lingered, heavy with implication. For William, this was not the end of a scene. It was the beginning of something far more complex, something rooted in his mother's legacy and the painful shadow it cast over the family. And as Camilla stood nearby, poised and silent, the questions only grew sharper. The message in the trunk. Could it reveal what the royal family fought hardest to keep hidden? Stay with us to uncover the truth. The hidden message in Camilla's trunk that left. William stunned. Later that evening, Kensington Palace felt unusually heavy with silence. The kind of silence that wrapped around the walls and clung to every shadow. Behind a locked door, away from the eyes of staff and courtiers, Prince William carried the trunk into a private room. He placed it carefully inside a secure safe, ensuring no one else could touch it. Then, with a voice firmer than usual, he ordered everyone out. He wanted to be alone. This was no ordinary discovery. It was something that struck at the very core of his family's past. When the room was finally empty, William opened the trunk slowly, as though even the sound of the hinges might betray what was hidden inside. He pulled out the first stack of papers, bound neatly but fragile with age. His breath caught in his throat the moment he recognized the handwriting. It was his mother's. The ink strokes, bold yet hurried, belonged unmistakably to Diana. The letters were dated 1995, a time when her life had been unraveling before the world. Reading them felt like stepping into her mind during those agonizing years. She wrote about the feeling of being followed, about phone calls that were never private, about strangers she thought were shadows, but who turned out to be real. Each line dripped with suspicion and fear. She confessed how Charles's indifference had cut her deeply, how his closeness with Camilla had made her feel invisible, unwanted, and trapped inside a marriage that was collapsing around her. Diana described lonely nights in Kensington Palace, crying behind locked doors where no one saw her pain but the paper she wrote on. William's hands trembled as he turned the pages, each sentence bringing back the woman he remembered as both his mother and a figure the world never truly understood. Then came something more chilling, her diary. Among its entries was one written just months before her death. The words inside carried the weight of a warning. Diana spoke of meetings that were never recorded in official logs, encounters with figures whose names she dared not write in full. Some were hinted at with initials, others left as shadows on the page. And then, there it was, scrawled in her own hurried hand, almost as though she had been racing against time. "If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident." The sentence sent a shock through William's body. He sank back into his chair, staring at the words. They weren't just notes, they were cries for help. They weren't just documents, they were fragments of truth. His mother had feared for her life, and now, years later, her very warnings had landed in his hands in a way no one could explain. These letters were not meant for historians or public eyes. They were her secrets, her unspoken truths, her private pain, now unearthed most unexpectedly. For William, it felt like hearing his mother's voice echoing back to him after decades of silence. But there was another layer to all of this. If Diana's letters and diaries had been locked away in royal archives, then how had they ended up in this trunk? Who had taken them, and why? These were not random trinkets or forgotten keepsakes. Someone had deliberately removed them. Someone had wanted them hidden, and the silence surrounding their reappearance was far more unsettling than the words themselves. As night deepened around Kensington Palace, William's mind refused to rest. The discovery had opened a door to something larger, something darker. This wasn't about family history anymore. It was about secrets carefully buried and now abruptly dragged into the light. The air in the room seemed colder, heavier, pressing against him as he locked the trunk again and tried to steady his breath. And now let us dig entirely into William's action on the case. What move would he dare to take, and who might try to stop him? Keep watching. William's secret move, the order that changed everything. The discovery was not just shocking, it was dangerous. Someone inside the palace had tampered with what should have remained untouchable. Now, with the truth leaking through the cracks, the fallout was spiraling beyond control. Prince William found himself at the center while Camilla's fragile acceptance as queen consort suddenly teetered on the edge. The stakes were far too high to ignore, and once whispers began circulating, the palace could no longer contain them. For William, sleep became impossible. Long into the night, the lamp in his private study glowed, casting sharp light across piles of letters and diaries. Each page he turned only deepened the weight pressing on his shoulders. By dawn, exhaustion etched his face. With a heavy heart, he secured the documents inside the safe before stepping out to meet the aides already waiting for him. The public remained in the dark, but within Kensington Palace, Clarence House, and Buckingham itself, word was spreading like wildfire. Palace whispers, faster than the press, carried stories that never stayed hidden for long. And because security protocol demanded that anything suspicious be logged officially, guards had already filed their reports. What had begun as a concealed family matter was now on record, poised to spill into public view. By 8 o'clock, William made his first decisive move. He summoned Sir Clive Alden, his father's trusted private secretary and one of the most seasoned men in royal administration. The discussion was direct. Those letters and diaries must be treated as stolen royal property. Sir Clive, steady and deliberate, asked one pointed question: "Do you want this handled quietly or strictly by the book?" William's reply was firm but careful. Both. Quietly but properly. If this looks like a cover-up, it will ruin more than the theft itself. By mid-morning, a crisis team had been pulled together. The same lawyers and advisors who had guided the monarchy through the Sussex departure and Prince Andrew's legal controversies now gathered around William. They laid out the risks in plain terms. First, possession of those papers outside the royal archives could be legally considered theft under the Royal Collections Act. Second, the very fact that these documents had slipped out of secure hands raised troubling questions about trust inside the palace walls. Who had allowed this, and why? The weight of it all pressed harder when William phoned his father. King Charles, worn down from years of family drama and public battles, offered only sparse advice. His voice was calm but heavy. "Handle it firmly, but don't let it destroy us." That left William with both the freedom and the burden of deciding the next steps alone. Meanwhile, at Clarence House, Camilla was unraveling in private. She retreated into intense talks with her secretary, her hands restless as her mind raced. For decades, she had battled the label of the other woman. Becoming queen consort had been her redemption, the fragile victory of her long, turbulent journey. But if scandal attached itself to her name again, all she had built could collapse in a matter of days. Unlike William, driven by a sense of duty, Camilla's instinct was survival. Old habits resurfaced, the impulse to shield, to silence, to prevent the storm from breaking. She had endured too many tabloid wars not to know how cruelly the press could strike. And now, with her crown, the damage would not be hers alone. It would scar the throne itself. Still, the machinery of the palace was already in motion. Lawyers drafted statements, aides circled for orders, and the royal households turned their eyes to William. With hesitation, impossible, and pressure mounting, he prepared to give his next command. And then came the final order given by William, one decision that would ripple through every corner of the monarchy. But what exactly did he command? And why did it leave even Camilla in silent shock? Stay glued to find out. William's closing command, the decision that redefined loyalty. Inside Kensington Palace, William's aides circled the room in tense debate. The atmosphere was thick with unease, every suggestion sharper than the last. Some pressed for immediate police involvement, arguing that stolen royal property had to be treated as a criminal matter. Others urged caution, insisting the documents should be quietly locked away in the royal archives at Windsor, never to be spoken of again. But William, firm and calculating, rejected both extremes. He had seen how secrecy always turned against them. The memory of Andrew's scandal was fresh. What had begun as whispers exploded because the palace's first instinct had been silence. William refused to repeat that mistake. As dawn bled into the day, he made his next decisive move. Instead of sending the matter to Scotland Yard or pretending nothing had happened, he ordered the royal legal officers to step in. They would question those connected to the discovery under palace authority, ensuring a record existed without ceding control to the press or outside investigators. To William, it was the middle path, quiet, but still accountable. The questioning began that afternoon in a secluded office within Clarence House. Though Camilla herself was not formally questioned, her shadow lingered over the matter. The trunk had come from her orbit, her history, her influence. And the unease in her silence was louder than words. Officers pressed for answers, but the origin of the letters remained clouded. Each page hinted at betrayal, secrecy, and wounds the monarchy had long tried to bury. The lack of clarity only deepened suspicion, and by evening, the file was back on William's desk. That night he sat alone in his study, the air heavy with the weight of decisions no young heir should have to make. Catherine entered quietly, her presence soft against the storm raging in his mind. She touched his shoulder and whispered, "What will you do?" William's reply was low, almost to himself. "If I ignore this, the crown looks weak. If I act, I could destroy them. Either way, the monarchy bleeds." Already, the walls were closing in. Journalists had caught wind of something unusual. A reporter from The Times phoned the palace press office, asking directly if private items had been mishandled at Clarence House. The press office, unprepared, denied everything. But the question itself confirmed William's fears. The story was moving, slipping from the palace's grip. Once the press smelled scandal, it was only a matter of time. Within days, the household erupted into crisis mode. Lawyers drafted possible statements, each one trying to balance truth with survival. Security around Kensington Palace tightened, not only to guard against intrusions, but to prevent another leak from within. Behind locked doors, staff whispered about whether the Prime Minister should be briefed, fearing the crisis might swell into a national embarrassment. Camilla, meanwhile, wore the strain heavily. Once known for her resilience and sharp composure, she now appeared restless and fragile. At a private dinner with King Charles 3 nights later, her mask cracked. She expressed her frustration in sharp bursts. Decades of tabloid torment, the long road to acceptance, and now this, threatening to unravel everything she had fought to rebuild. Her fear was simple. If suspicion turned toward her, even faintly, the redemption she had clawed back as queen consort could vanish overnight. 3 perilous choices lay before William. He could bury the documents in silence, but risk accusations of another royal cover-up. He could release them fully, exposing the truth but plunging the family into chaos. Or he could reveal only fragments, enough to look transparent, but never enough to satisfy the relentless press. Each path carried ruin in its shadow, and none offered safety. Pressure grew on him with every passing hour. Calls for a formal investigation mounted, and whispers demanded accountability. William's final command shook the palace to its core. But is this the end of the secret, or the start of a far greater royal storm? We would love to hear your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe.